Well, let me start by introducing you. Greg Gibson is the proprietor of 10 Pound Island Book Company, based in
Gloucester, Mass., home of the wicked tuna, the perfect storm, captain's courageous.
Because you specialize in nautical books.
Indeed, and manuscripts.
And so that's the topic of our conversation today. What exactly defines a nautical book?
That's a good question for a specialist, because if the definition is too narrow, the specialist starves to death. So I've had to exercise considerable ingenuity in expanding that definition. And in fact, in the parlance of the trade, they're sometimes referred to as wet books. So if it's got water in it or near it or somehow refers to it, I'll try to sell it.
So why nautical?
Well, when I went into the book business in 1976, I had no idea what I was doing, of course, and I thought, I'll sit in my shop and smoke a pipe and write novels because I'll have plenty of time to... and of course, that was just ridiculous.
But you did write novels.
I did, but not in that way. But I soon found out that it's my customers who were educating me, not the other way around. And because Gloucester is a seaport town, many of my early and most enthusiastic customers were looking for books about ships and the sea. And although I'm not a yachtsman or anything like that, the idea sort of appealed to me, and I began learning more and more from my customers, the book collectors. Other maritime dealers schooled me, and it just seemed like it was a specialty that was congenial to my own interests.
Now, what about Matty Needle, John Thompson, and Louis Howland?
Well, Howland was my first contact with the trade. He had recently retired as an editor at Little Brown, and having spent a lifetime as a yachtsman, came into my shop and told me what he was looking for, and we struck up a friendship. And he was very careful to, in the most transparent manner, tell me what it was that he was buying that he could resell, because he knew the more knowledge I had, the better I'd be able to supply him with stuff. So after about...
Because he was a book scout?
He ran a company called Howland and Company, and he sold fine, rare yachting books to his fine, rare yachting clientele, in which he was deeply involved. I mean, it's a narrow circle, but it's a passionate interest kind of people. So
yeah.
Those were
with lots of deep pockets.
A fair amount of deep pockets, but there's a lot of there's some counterbalancing Yankee cheapness going on at the same time. It's a delicate mix. Anyway, after a while, we started doing business together. Sometimes, buying stuff together or swapping stuff back and forth, and it developed in that normal collegial way.
What was he looking for, though?
Yachting.
So what does that mean then? Photographs?
Photographs, for sure, by the great masters of early yachting photography, Stebbins and Beckin of Cows, and all this sort of stuff. And to fill in the spots, there were endless, it seemed at that time, books about yachting cruises that people had written. There were books about building yachts. His family...
So those travel books, you mean? Like which cruises are the best and rating them and that kind of thing?
No, my cruise to Denmark, or my sail around England.
So a memoir, kind of?
That sort of thing, yeah.
Okay.
But inevitably, it involved one's interaction with the yacht, and I think that was the key thing. That's why people collected this stuff and liked to read them. Well, how did this guy sail to Tahiti on his 27-foot catcher?
Just so technical
a little of that,
prowess.
A little adventure, a lot of philosophizing. These guys are just given to... I guess when you spend all your time looking out over the ocean, you get...
And the stars.
Melville would say your profound thoughts, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. And
Chichester, too, comes to mind.
Chichester, yeah, for sure. He was a
Well, around the world.
master of that sort of reporting.
Yeah.
And it's a memoir, but it's also an adventure book. There's a little technical stuff in there.
Yeah.
Sailing Alone Around the World by Joshua Slocum. A brilliant, it's one of the immortal books in any field. And it was just about a guy in a boat.
And why is it immortal?
Because Slocum was a brilliant writer, and he just had a brilliant way of perceiving things in a wonderfully economical, laconic, old sort of Yankee way of telling it with humor and depth at the same time. Just if you haven't read it, you should.
Who published it?
Let me see, 1902 Century. It appeared first in Century magazine, I think in the late 90s, and then was a book around the turn of the century by Century publishers.
And it hasn't been out of print since, or?
Sort of like that, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
probably not.
Yeah.
It's certainly one of the best-selling books of its kind ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how big is this market for nautical? Like, I'm surprised that they're...
Not big enough. So
Well, if the collectors had their say, it's too big.
let's distinguish between what used to be the market, these guys sitting around with their pipes in front of their fires and buying books from Howland's catalogs,
Yeah.
and scholarly interest in maritime history, which is mostly what I provide now, since those old Yankees that used to buy those books have pretty much died off.
Okay.
And no institution is buying books because they have everything they need. So what are they buying? They're buying manuscripts, artifacts, ephemera that contribute to the historical record, so that if they've got a graduate student or a professor who's researching something, and I have a manuscript that fills that need, they buy it, and it's historical.
So this would be,
Material.
again, a manuscript of, like ship logs
Sure,
and
a
stuff
ship log, a whaling log, letters, business files, ledgers.
Okay.
So my model for the last maybe 10 or 15 years is I buy things that don't exist and sell them to people who don't know they want them. And that's been, that works. That works.
So you're going to have to unpack that, especially the stuff that doesn't exist.
Well, consider
That's magic, isn't it?
consider a sailor's journal that's been languishing in an attic in Ohio for 150 years, and somehow I find out about it and I buy it.
So how's the somehow?
Well, after having been in the business for 40 years and writing checks that don't bounce, you accumulate a certain credibility, and people call me.
Just because you've specialized, so...
Yeah. Well, Gibson will know what to do with this.
I
And he'll
see.
write me a check that won't bounce, and I can take it to the bank, and I don't have to wait 30 days. And, it's that sort of thing.
Right.
But I do still scout myself, book fairs, and when I'm on the road, if there's a place to look, I'll look.
Yeah.
In any event, until I actually find it, figure out what it is, and describe it, there's a sense in which it hasn't existed. It's not a part of the historical record.
Right.
So I found something that didn't exist.
So you're making history.
I'm identifying history. I'm not
Yeah.
making it.
Well,
And then I call up.
You're making people aware of history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I call up whatever institution and I say, Joe, Nigel, I've got something I think you'd be interested in. Well, you had no idea that you'd be interested in it until I explained to you what it was.
Yeah.
And then you say, yeah, Greg, you're right. I'm interested in that. I think I'll buy that. So
Yeah.
I buy things that don't exist and sell them to people who don't know they want them.
Okay. That's a very nice little
So
moniker.
far, so good.
What about, as I say, I mentioned these three individuals who were book scouts. What did they teach you?
Well, everything. Matt and John were two of the earliest people in the trade that I ever met. And as I say, I started out in Europe. I have this imagining, and I don't know if it's true, but that if one were interested in being a bookseller, one would go to work for an established firm and learn the business. In America, there was no such, prior to Colorado Antiquarian Book School and Rare Book School, there was no institutional means for doing this. So people like me would start out completely unschooled, unaware of anything that was going on, and we had to learn as best we could, and the way we learned was by following the example of more established dealers.
Well, plus you're prey to them too. They can come in and pick out all sorts of stuff that you.
And they did indeed. And they did
yeah,
indeed.
Yeah.
But
that teaches you something.
It certainly does, and
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that at all. Because without that thing, number one, I wouldn't be able to pay the rent, and number two, I'd have no idea what to be looking for. So maybe 2 weeks after I first opened my little shop, Needle came through, prowling like a shark in the sea, and bought that and bought that and bought that, and might have even paid me in cash and disappeared. He was back 2 weeks later, and after a few months, it sort of dawned on me, hey, this guy is looking for stuff that I know how to find.
So you want to feed him?
Feed him, feed him, feed him. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at some point, inevitably, as happened with Howland, there was a day when he had something to sell to me. So it becomes a two-way relationship, and that's what makes the trade go round.
Right.
I'd been in business maybe a year, and this fellow pulls up in a pickup truck with his girlfriend, and they're sleeping in the truck when they have to, and they're driving around the country. Now get this. I had no idea that this was even possible to do, and when I saw someone who was doing it, it blew my mind. He was buying books from people and selling them to other people while he was driving around.
For more money.
For more money, yes. And I was like, oh my God.
This is a dream.
Windows, doors flying open. And so somehow we also hit it off personally, and they became dear friends to my wife and I. The lady he was traveling with became his wife, and we just hit it off. We still.
Now, how long ago was that? That was a while back.
1977, I want to say, maybe.
Okay.
Something
Now,
like that.
because of the internet, is that still possible?
I have no idea. I'm an old
Because
man.
you don't know anyone that's driving around in a truck like that.
We don't. We can't do that anymore and make it work the way it worked.
Because
in the day.
Everyone knows what the prices are.
No, because there are no places to stop.
Yeah.
Thompson had come up. He ran a pretty healthy retail business down in Georgetown, and he'd go out and do the Midwestern swing, and then he'd come up to New England, and we'd spend days driving around, going to auctions, stopping at small shops, visiting dealers with closed collections and so forth, and he'd go back with a truck full of books. That's how we did it.
Yeah.
Couldn't do that anymore. It's just everybody who's doing it has all the stuff online anyway. So
Right, and the doors are closed to their houses.
In some cases not. But you don't need to go to their house
To find it.
So I've still got scouts. In the day, I had scouts who would bring stuff in to me. Right.
Yeah.
Now I've got 2 or 3 scouts who email me a URL.
Okay.
Greg, check this out. Right?
Check this out, and if you buy anything, give me a percentage.
Or let's buy it together, or just think of me next time you, so forth and so on.
Okay.
So it's the mechanism's sort of the same, but the manner in which it's conducted is completely gone. You can't. Wife and I February in New England is bleak, so we used to go out and do the San Francisco small show and then drive down to LA and do the big show, or vice versa. Scout all the way down, from
That's so much
Washington
fun.
State to San Diego.
And I guess obviously you would find more nautical books on the coast than you would anywhere else.
No, not necessarily at all.
Okay.
No. In fact, a lot of, for example, whaling logs that I buy turn up in the Midwest because the families moved. They had a chance to buy a farm, or and they brought the chest with them that had all Granddad's interesting stuff, and all of a sudden it's in a little auction in western Pennsylvania or Indiana, and there it is. So there's no strict geographical correlation anymore, but what there was shops all the way down the West Coast. I mean, Peter Howard, you could spend a day there, and when he closed and departed the scene, it wasn't as good in Berkeley as it had been. It wasn't as possible in Berkeley. Ian, what's his name, is his dear friend there. There was still a little bit, then he died, and then there was less and less and less. The same all up and down the coast. Warrenbach in San Diego, I could spend a day there, and it was a good day. And he died. He's gone. I don't like to
No.
harp on that. It just
No.
sounds like an
Well,
old man's lament.
You want to talk about how good it was, but today's different and in many ways just as good. Is that fair?
Still paying the rent.
Well, you just told me you're cooking here at the Boston Book Fair,
Yes, this year's a good show.
which is something you can't really predict.
No. To some degree, it depends on the material that you bring, but you also need a buyer on the other end of that. Somebody has
On
to
the
come
other
and
end of
see
the
it,
line.
and write you the check.
Right.
The other reason I do these fairs is to buy material, and that's something that totally out of your control. This year was great. I found some wonderful stuff. Some years, nothing. The great Lou Weinstein, his formula for calculating how successful a book fair he'd take the number that he sold, the dollar amount that he sold, and add it to the dollar amount that he spent. That was the number that dictated the level of the book fair.
Formula, yeah. Obviously, Moby Dick is a big name, Treasure Island. When I was a kid, I read the Swallows and Amazons books by Arthur Ransom, and the covers on those are gorgeous.
Wonderful.
We mentioned Chichester,
Slocum.
O'Brien, Shackleton. Anyone else that's big?
Well, let me say first, aside from Melville and Slocum, I don't think anybody's very big at all. That collecting nautical fiction is such a narrow and ever-dwindling field. Again, I mean, if I could sell that stuff, I'd be happy to do it, but that's not what I'm selling. I'm selling mostly ephemeral and manuscript, one-of-a-kind material. That's what people, advanced collectors and institutions, are looking for.
Not just in nautical, in everything. They want unique items, don't they?
So I'm an opportunist. I'll buy anything in the Americana field, including wet books or wet manuscripts. But yeah, what the internet has done is probably your last 20 interviewees have told you. It puts a premium on something that's unique.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
because otherwise there's 50 copies out there and you're competing against.
Yeah.
And that's the story with nautical fiction. I'm not interested in getting into that rat race.
I mean, it used to be that if it was signed, well, that narrows it down. There aren't as many that are signed. Now you've just moved it one step further, I guess.
Another box to click in the search filters and boom. I don't, that's not for me. I find it boring.
What excites you most about nautical books then?
Wow, I'd never thought of that. And I do. As soon as you said that, I realized I really, this stuff turns me on.
Yeah, well, hopefully it would, yeah.
I think there are two factors. One is any kind of personal record that's told with any kind of depth or difference. I just bought a wonderful logbook yesterday, and the reason I bought it was the journey wasn't particularly unique, and there wasn't a lot of detail about that. But the guy who wrote it was so damn funny. He was just a character. And I said, man, I just like this voice.
First of all, is a log just basically like a diary on board?
Well,
what else is in there?
There are a couple of kinds. In a commercial voyage or in a military operation, you'd need to send a record back of where you went and what you did and why you did it. So you're
justifying the expense, partly, I guess?
Certainly in a commercial sense, or where the whales were and where they weren't.
Right.
And in the military, did he follow my orders? Or what happened out there that made him not, so forth and so on. So there's that kind of account. But then the captain or the mate or even common seaman, which is far less common and much more interesting, would keep a record of, their 2-year journey to China and back or something like that.
So my diary, basically.
Like a diary, more like a diary.
Okay.
So, and we still call them journals or blogs, but they're not of that official sort of kind.
I see. So part of the excitement is the story of lives that are told at sea that's an adventure, right?
So the story component, personal adventure component is important, but also increasingly the visual aspect of this thing becomes what you need. Okay, so I've got a unique piece, but if it's completely inscrutable, it's going to take a lot more work for me to sell that dog than if it's got a breaching whale in full color on the, if the guy...
He drew it, or...
Many of these sailors were artisans. They had a lot of time on their hands, and some of them were very skilled. So you'll see a whaling log that's completely manuscript, and that's one sort of thing. There'll be another one beside it with beautiful or humorous or wonderfully rendered illustrations of this guy's adventures chasing whales. And that'll bring 5 times the price of the unadorned one because of that visual component. So you begin to get eyes for that kind of material.
So I guess there's a log that would have to be submitted, and then there's logs that they just keep for their own personal families and personal records.
Yep, that's it. The British Admiralty kept them all. You couldn't keep your own.
Oh, you weren't allowed to?
No, you'd go on one of those
even if you wanted to give it to your wife?
Couldn't do it. But they did, which is great.
Okay. Yeah. And again, how do you get a hold of these? How do you find these? Are they common or not?
No,
they're not.
But again, I've got 40 years in the trade, and I do what I do, and that's how I am able to make my living, because I can get this stuff.
So it's who you know and who knows you.
Partly that. And the other thing is, people sometimes say to me, gosh, you got really great stuff. How do you get it? And I tell them, well, I pay retail.
Right. That'll perk people's ears up.
You want to get good stuff. You're going to pay for it. You can't be shy.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes I'll flip stuff for a very low percentage, but I know I'm going to be able to sell it, so I buy it.
Then, of course, there's the Titanic and disasters. That's pretty exciting. Does that excite you?
Got shipwreck customers. The Titanic bores the pants off me. I generally don't have anything to do with it. It's just sort of like baseball memorabilia. It's too popular.
It sells, though.
I suppose
but
it does.
You only sell stuff that excites you.
I'm not selling it because it doesn't interest me.
Okay.
Leonardo DiCaprio, have at it, boys. Not for me.
No, but A Night to Remember, that was a pretty good book.
It was a good book, yeah. I read it. Yeah. I liked it okay.
Okay.
I sold it many times.
What about, like, menus from ships? That must be neat.
That's fun, yeah. I do that, some of that.
Passenger lists and...
Those are all sort of steamship related things, and that's a subset all of its own that branches over into people who do food, right? You asked me what the boundaries of this maritime endeavor are, and boy, it just gets, the closer you look, the broader it gets. So
right.
Sure, menus, absolutely.
That works for you.
Yeah, sometimes. Good ones.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out why someone would collect nautical. It's just the love of the sea, the fact they like yachting. What other factors?
And not being a collector, I really don't know, but it seems to me that it's a sort of mental condition. I wouldn't call it exactly a disease, but it's definitely a condition that the satisfaction that you get from acquiring.
Yeah, but that's a general answer.
Yeah.
What about a specific to nautical?
Well, I suppose, if you like sailboats.
Right.
Or you are a painter and you like ocean stuff. I mean, I've sold stuff to artists that they just collect, not to paint, but just because it's sort of the world that they move around in.
What are some of the great publishers of nautical stuff? Like, was John Murray a big nautical publisher? Or?
Yeah, sure, and Bentley, Phillips. Some of the most interesting publishers of nautical stuff are the people who write it themselves, because
they self-publish?
It's not totally, and from way back, way before, a very gifted artist named Gilkerson, for example, found endless ways to package and repackage his artwork and his historical research. He was very good at both of them, but he'd issue this limited edition and that limited edition. Norman Flaterman, a very clever fellow, his whaling book exists in 3 or 4 different iterations. Edward Rose Snow only wrote 2 books, but he used that material. He probably wrote 25 books, but they were really all the same.
Just packaged differently.
Yeah, or the same facts shuffled around a little bit, same old stories shuffled around a little bit. Yeah, I mean, American Harper, trying to see title pages now. I don't know.
There's no one that sort of specializes in nautical that.
There probably is, but
Yeah.
I don't know who they are.
Okay.
Because I don't see stuff that way, and I'm less and less interested in books.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, we should be changing the name of your organization, maybe. Your association of books, so you're not selling books anymore.
There are still some people who deal in modern first editions and rare books, and like my booth mate sells. Well, there are wet books. There are also white books, which are old things bound in vellum, because he sells old
Oh,
books.
I thought that might be about snow, but no.
No, and brown books. Yeah.
Brown books are like cow.
So, I mean, you got to have some fun here.
Yeah, for sure.
Otherwise, it gets boring. So anyway, there are still people who sell books, but by and large, the trade is kind of moving away from books because they're increasingly difficult to sell.
So I guess these ephemera shows are getting more and more popular.
And how?
Huh.
I sort of got into the field in the middle of my career, and I've had the pleasure of watching these shows fill up more and more with people who used to be exclusively book dealers and are getting more and more interested in ephemera because it's more interesting, it sells better.
And again, I just want to know where you source all of this stuff from. It sounds like if it's unique, it's like who's kept all of this stuff?
That's an interesting process, and I don't know why stuff gets saved for me to find it, but I do know that when I find it and I figure out what it is and I place a value on it, I've commodified that thing and in a sense saved it for the record because now it has a value. If there's anything to justify this nonsense that we spend our whole lives doing, chasing this stuff, I think it's that we don't create the record, but we identify it and save it and make it available. And
right.
That's culturally.
Well, you put it in front of people who will do something with it, preserve it.
Yep, we see
and study it.
We see it and recognize it and value it, and then it moves on to that chain that you're talking about. So there is some reason for our existence.
What's the most beautiful, affordable type of nautical book you can imagine? Or not imagine, that you've found? Like, I'm thinking maybe, Moby Dick by the Aryan Press.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. I like the Rockwell Kent Moby. Yeah, I've got one in my booth now that a living artist, I think it was probably a prospectus for trying to do an Aryan Press Moby. He's got 12 sample pages that he painted and drew and lettered himself, and that's beautiful. But I don't really see books that way.
You don't see them as beautiful?
I mean, I read them, yeah. And
Okay.
I don't have those kind of eyes, and that's just me.
Okay. Just winding down here. It seems to me that the nautical, particularly the books that document various voyages, it holds the same fascination that space exploration holds.
For sure, yeah, and the
like
Arctic,
the New World,
the polar stuff too. I mean, that was like moonshots 100 years ago. And yeah, now that you mention it, beautiful, those antiquarian things with the big color plates and maps and charts. That certainly has an aesthetic component, but I don't know. I just don't see stuff that way. I don't know what it is.
You're just a cold, hard businessman.
I'm probably a moron. More like limited in my abilities to perceive things and appreciate things. Beauty, yeah. What's that? Uh-huh.
You heard of the Floating Brothel, book by someone called Reese? The Floating Brothel.
No, never heard of it.
I don't know how I came across that, but it just sounded really intriguing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Well,
but again, it would fit into your category.
Well, I've got on offer here at this book fair rules regulating prostitutes in Macau, and some of whom were floating. They called them, what do they call them, flower boats?
Right.
So prostitution has always been legal in Macau, so they needed some way to regulate it. That's the kind of angle I'm coming in on, rather than this book that this guy wrote. I'm not seeing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a reader. I like to read stuff, but when I'm looking for material to buy and sell, that's not how I see things.
Well, prostitution and sailors go hand in hand.
I'll say.
So have you got a lot of interesting stuff on prostitution? Like, it'd have to be in a port Of course, but
Well, I was in
port of call.
I was in the Navy for 4 years.
You were?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. There's
I could have
another possible reason.
I could have written the book.
Could you? And what about venereal disease? There's another whole new category.
Totally. But in all seriousness, scurvy,
Scurvy, yeah.
which once they figured out how to not have guys get sick and die on these long voyages,
Yeah.
we began to be able to explore the world in a much deeper, more meaningful, more penetrating, and more disastrous way.
Yeah.
So we can joke about VD and all that kind of stuff, but scurvy is real and real important
Yeah.
because we had to be able to figure that out before we could do what we did in terms of,
Destroying the world.
destroying the world. Yes. Yeah. I think you're getting this. You get a knack for this sort of thing.
Just finally, someone who wants to get into collecting nautical, I know it's a huge area, but you got any advice for best place to start or what they might want to do, where they might want to go?
Totally. Yeah. I have,
Not in terms of like just the love of the field, but also, I know investing is dangerous, but with that, all of that in mind.
the Colorado Antiquarian Book Seminar trains people who want to become dealers to be dealers, but also
I'm talking collectors.
but also advanced collectors or beginning collectors go through there too, because they can learn about the material that they're interested in collecting.
Right.
So I did a couple of turns there as a specialist dealer and a substitute teacher, and I wrote a book, a pamphlet of advice for beginning dealers, but I think it would apply equally to beginning collectors, and the book was called Don't Do It. It's
Very good.
just too hard.
Was it a thin book?
30 pages perhaps, yeah.
30 pages of don't do it?
Don't do it. It's just too hard.
Okay.
But if you do it, give me a call. I might have some books for you.
Yeah, but you weren't listening to my question.
I was trying to get my own answer.
I know.
I don't know. Your
Your
question was more boring than my answer.
No. It's like people are interested in what they should collect.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And you're an expert in the field.
Well,
and,
what's my advice to people?
Maybe they want to make a little bit of a profit, or maybe not, but they want to know how to develop a really cool collection in nautical books.
I'll get serious with this.
Yeah, thank you.
We don't ever talk about making
Money. No.
Don't
Okay.
just
Don't do
it.
that. No.
Don't do it.
No, just do it for fun.
Yeah. And number two, condition.
Okay.
If you're interested in prostitution and you're buying books about venereal disease, make sure you get the best copy available, even if you have to pay multiple times
Okay.
for that.
But that doesn't.
Other
That's
copy.
not nautical, though. Nautical. Is there, like, are there undervalued, affordable books about the sea that come to mind? That
No, I really, again, we're talking about books as opposed to manuscripts and ephemera.
This is me not listening now.
And the internet has somehow leveled that field to such an extent that maybe 50 years ago I could have told you that, laureates they're the people to watch out for because they've got the. But now,
Who? What?
laureates, the publisher and booksellers, laureates in Boston, like that, a publishing company.
I see. They're
But now
actually,
that doesn't
hold.
it doesn't mean anything because the business has changed so much. The publishing business has changed so much.
Okay.
So are there any areas of maritime books that?
Like beautiful ships that are hand colored or something.
No, not that I know of. There's no
Okay.
advantage. And the whole trend thing is so whimsical. Who would have thought in the 60s that photography was going to be as big as it was, or cartography, or these things come and for reasons nobody really understands. They catch fire, and we all run around like fools chasing this kind of material. You're asking me what the next one is going to be?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm asking you if I'm I'm listening to this. I'm interested in this whole field of nautical books, and I want to start accumulating a collection. Where should I start?
What are you interested in?
I'm interested in lovely old ships.
I would start there.
But what book should I go after? 'Cause-
Books about lovely old ships.
Okay.
You got to follow. I mean, seriously.
Okay.
You follow your own interest. You buy to condition.
Yeah.
And you don't think about it as an investment. Sure, it holds for any field that you're collecting in. But what I'd say to you as a beginning collector of nautical books is just exactly that. Okay, Nigel, what are you really interested in here? What are we talking about? Mm-hmm. Because the more specific you can collect around that, the more meaningful and strong your collection is going to be.
Yeah.
If you're buying to price or prettiness or something like this, you're going to be all over the board, and when your heirs and assigns have to take care of the mess you've left them, they're going to have a lot harder time disposing of it than if you'd really been disciplined, followed your own interest, bought to condition, and didn't think about the inevitable. What are your heirs and assigns going to do with what you got?
Okay.
So
That's very good advice.
Thank
Thank you very much for
thank you.
spending the time to talk.
Appreciate it. I'm sorry we.
Yeah, we'll
didn't
see
have
how that transpires. But I've been speaking with Greg Gibson, who is the proprietor of. I never did get 10-Pound Island book. Can I get a quick reason for the name?
1976. I'm living on Centennial Avenue in a third-floor walk-up overlooking Gloucester Harbor with my wife and infant son, and I've been sucked into what I, at that point, realized with some alarm is going to be my trade for the rest of my life. And I walk down to the harbor and I say, all right, what am I going to call this thing? I look out in Gloucester Harbor and there's 10-Pound Island. It's a hunk of granite. It's been there for millions of years. It's elemental. And I say, 10-Pound Island, that's pretty good. And all the wise old heads say, yeah, okay, kid, within 3 years it'll be called Gregory Gibson Rare Books. And I never got there. I'm still on 10-Pound Island, still on the island.
And you'll be there forever.
Well, in some sense, yeah. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. It's a lot of work, but I'm still having fun.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Again.
Thanks. Sorry, but hey, Doug, it's your turn. Come on down. Want to do an interview? Thanks, Nigel.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.